I'm here to talk to you about a topic that I think is so important to us all professionally and personally. And it's really become my life's work. And that's the work around being able to simplify what we do, or let's talk about its evil twin, complexity. I mean, as we were talking about earlier, the time that you spend every day doing mundane things really became apparent during COVID. And imagine if we could shift that time to the work that really matters. What could you accomplish? I mean, when you think about it, if you're even a business today that has 10,000 employees, right? For some of you, that's much bigger than you. For some of you, that's not. 10,000 employees, the average employee works 2,100 hours a year. That's just 40 hours a week. That's 20 million hours being spent at that organization. Imagine if they could get 5% of that time back for more meaningful work. That would be 1,000,000 hours. Right? The numbers prove it out. The answer or the question really is, how do we do it and how much do we want to do? So what I'm going to talk to you about right now is how complexity happens, and it doesn't happen how you think it does. Then I want to talk to you about people that are embracing simplification in ways that you never imagined with really great results. And most importantly, I want to be able to give you some very practical things that you can do to start making complexity part of your DNA and just the way that you work. So we're going to be interacting today, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. But first of all, what I want to do is I want to dive in and I want to tell you a quick story. Basically, there was a an example that I ran into, and this is when I was doing some work in Duisburg, Germany. And what happened was we were being called in actually to create a culture of simplification and innovation. And it was at a nuclear power company. And this company is highly regulated, very old. And they asked us to kind of inject some new spirit into the organization because things were just drowning in complexity. And what was really interesting was just before this session started, there were about 20 of us, the CHRO and the COO came up to me and said, I really think you're going to have a difficult time accomplishing this, which is not the most inspiring way to start a session. And I said, well, why do you think that? And he said, well, we're a bunch of scientists and engineers. And let me tell you a kind of story here that will exemplify what I mean. So he tells this story about a scientist who once had 10 monkeys in a cage. And every day he put a banana on top of the cage and he let all the monkeys fight to get the banana. Now, of course, one of them eventually got it and was eating the banana, was very happy. And he took a bucket of water and he poured it on all the 9 monkeys left in the cage. And they were screeching and they were mad. Next day, same thing. Puts a banana on top of the cage. All the monkeys fight to get it. One of them gets it. He takes a bucket, pours it on all the other 9 monkeys in the cage. Again, they're mad. And by the end of the week, nobody is going to get that banana. No one will let a monkey go up and get it. So the scientist says, you know what? I'm going to change this experiment up. These monkeys are smart. Every week now, I'm going to take an old monkey out and I'm going to put a new monkey in and let's see what happens. And so the next week on that Monday, takes an old monkey out, puts a new monkey in the cage. What's the first thing that monkey does? Goes for the banana. All the monkeys pull him back down, right? Next day, same thing. All the monkeys pull the new monkey back down. By the end of the week, that monkey knows, don't go for that banana. And at the end of 10 weeks, there's 10 new monkeys in the cage. None of them even think of going for that banana, but none of them know why. This is what happens to us at work all the time. We don't question the assumptions around how we work. There are a lot of rules, a lot of policies, procedures that exist that have outlived their time. They may have been good at one point, but it's time to try something different. And there's never been a better time than right now for us to challenge the way that we work, because that's how change happens, challenging our assumptions. And that's what allows simplicity to take hold. So here's what we're going to do today. We are now going to do 2 things. First, I want to challenge you how you work. And I also want to challenge what you do, because we don't spend enough time doing that. Now, we're going to interact today, and we're going to use Menti. So if you don't mind, open up your phone's browser or whatever second device you have nearby, go to menti.com for me. And when you do, and you're at menti.com, enter in this code at the top of your screen. And that code is 2689 8977. 2689 8977. And let's answer this poll. How often do you experience complexity at work? How often do you experience complexity at work? And your options are never, 1 to 2 times a week, 3 to 4 times a week, or of course, constantly. Again, it's never, 1 to 2 times a week, 3 to 4 times a week, or constantly. Now, this is all anonymous. You can be as honest as you want, of course, and I'll be so interested to see what people say. Right now, constantly is far in the lead. It's like a horse race. Constantly is in the lead. 3 to 4 times a week is coming up the back. 1 to 2 is taking over. I ask this question all the time of people, and I'm never surprised really by the answer to this question, because what I'm seeing here right now as the answers are coming in is pretty indicative of what people say. Most people, if not the overwhelming majority, experience either 3 to 4 times or constantly. Now, whether that's real or perceived is a whole nother story. I believe it's real, right? Because most of us can feel the unnecessary work that we're being asked to do that's taking us away from what we were hired to do in the first place. So if this is how you felt, that we were constantly experiencing complexity at work, I'm not surprised. And let me tell you that you're not alone. So complexity right now, just to give you a couple stats, is overwhelming us. There was a great study that was done by Deloitte not long ago, and they asked people up to VP level, how would you describe your work? And almost 75% of them described their work as either complex or very complex. Pretty consistent with what you just said. Now, the reason for that is we measure 10 times the amount of data that we did even 10 years ago, right? That's incredible that we can do it because of the technology and the ability. And what's interesting about it is it's not just about how much we can measure, but the problem is, what do we do with that when we have that information? Do we have the time to take action on it? For most of us, the answer is no. The other thing that's driving that is the amount of communication, emails, meetings, Zooms, Teams, whatever you use right now due to hybrid work. And the third thing is the amount of committees, governance structures, and policies that have been put in place in the last decade have increased anywhere between 50 to 350%, depending on what organization you're in and how regulated you are. So what I want to talk about here is what is happening at work is that complexity is destroying our organizations. It's a bold statement, but we all know deep down that it's true. Complexity is destroying our companies. There was another great survey that was done by SAP on the future of work. This time, they asked CEOs around the world, 5,000 of them, what their number one strategic concern was. It was interesting because I saw your poll from the last keynote and all the trends that were presented, which were fantastic. I'd like to actually add one more thing that I thought was interesting. When they asked the CEOs what their number one strategic concern was, 70% said their number one strategic concern was complexity and that it was only getting worse. Now, that was the first time that when this survey was done, that, as they say, the call was coming from inside the house, right? What was happening to everybody was that rather than saying global competitiveness, regulation, supply chain, the issue for them was the complexity and their ability to operate with it. Because if you're operating with complexity, you can't move fast enough. The enemy of complexity isn't just that it's a financial drain. And we know that. That's the obvious thing. The problem with complexity is that complexity is the enemy of meaningful work. It holds you back, right? And all your employees back from doing what you hired them to do in the first place, unless, of course, you hired them for their amazing email skills and their ability to run a meeting. So let's talk about this issue of speed versus size. And what's interesting about this for most of us here is we might be small to mid-sized organizations competing with larger organizations. And that's great for you because your ability to move faster now and actually overtake even an industry has never been better, right? Due to technology, to the ability to connect, etc. However, if you're operating with complexity, you're going to miss out. And if you don't believe me, I want you to take a look at this slide. Right here are people we can aspire to be. These are billion-dollar businesses that are less than 20 years old that have completely upended their industry by using simplicity. I mean, think about it. Uber makes it simple to get a car. Airbnb makes it easy to get a place to stay. WhatsApp, free for you to be able to talk. Kickstarter, it makes it incredibly simple for small organizations to get access to capital quickly to be able to pilot and launch a product with other people's money. Dropbox, easy to share files. Netflix, really easy to binge watch your life away, even when you shouldn't. Simple, easy, focused. So we know that complexity is an issue. We know that we need to change it. But the real question for me to ask you is this: why do we choose complexity every day? I want to do a little experiment with you. So for those of you that have your coffee, like I do, put it down. If you have anything in your hands, like your phone, put it down. And I want you to do a quick thing for me. Sitting wherever you are, I would love you to pat your head, rub your stomach, and click your heels for me. Can you do that? Just quick. Pat your head, rub your stomach, click your heels. I wish I could see everybody trying and struggling with this. It's always so fun to see people live do it. Okay, stop. Now, I can't see you all, but if you could raise your hand just for fun, cognitively, how many people were able to do all three at once? Right? How many of you did all three at once? I bet the majority of you were raising your hand. The problem is that's not what I asked you to do. I just asked you to pat your head, rub your stomach, and click your heels. Why do so many of us do all three at once? Well, two things just happened, and this is just a cognitive issue for us. First of all, we like to elevate everything to the same level of urgency, right? Every meeting, every email, every decision has to be made urgently when we know that's not the case. The other thing is we like to multitask, which in some instances is very good, right? I mean, it's okay. You're taking a phone call while you're doing something. I understand that. But the science tells us that actually focusing, especially on the more strategic and important things, one thing at a time and not being distracted, gets us better results. The thing I'm trying to point out here, even with this simple exercise, is that the bad news here is this: most of complexity is self-imposed and unnecessary. The good news is most of it is in our sphere of control, and I'm going to show you how to get rid of it. So if you're one of those people that pat your head, rub your stomach, click your heels, the issue for you is right now you are what I call falling into the complexity trap, right? For many of us, we spend our day thinking what I like to say is that we're in a groove, right? Because it's similar, it's habit, it's easier, but actually we're not in a groove, we're in a rut. And it's hard to know the difference because they look and feel exactly the same. That's why many of us pre-COVID were happy with our routine and how efficient and organized we had become. And then COVID hits and we realize, oh my God, look at all the unnecessary things I was doing. That's part of the complexity trap. And let me explain it because it's really three things. The first thing is that you have less focus. And we know this because as companies, no matter what your size is, we tend to value, reward, and promote people based on more, right? Not necessarily valuable. I mean, has anyone ever been reported or promoted for doing that one great thing during the year? Yes, but if that's all you did, probably not. So the issue for most people is we actually focus on how much we do during the day. But the issue is it's not how much is on your to-do list. It's what's on your to-do list in the first place. You know that feeling that when you get done, you were busy all day and you're tired, and someone says, well, what did you do today? I don't know about you, but some days I'll say, God, I know I did a lot, but I can't tell you what it was. Probably because I just did stuff, but nothing significant or valuable. The second thing about the complexity trap, which is really interesting, is that you have less agility, right? And right now, agility is really important, being able to pivot. And the issue is because we spend most of our time internally, not externally. And basically, for our organizations, and this is important for businesses our size, is that what happens is every day we just trade the telescope, that ability to look forward, right? To do those future trends that we heard in the last keynote. And we trade that telescope for the microscope. Should we have the microscope? Absolutely, right? I run my business on data. I'm sure you do too. But the problem is we don't get a chance to be able to use that data externally for things that are important, like spending time with customers, coming up with new business models, innovating things. The third thing about the complexity trap, and probably the most important, is that we have less time for thinking. We really value doing over thinking. And when you think about it, imagine remember those days we went into people's offices? When you walk into somebody's office and you saw someone just, staring out the window, smiling, and you would look at them and say, I hope I'm not interrupting something. I just want to ask you a question. And if that person said back to you, oh, don't worry about it, that's fine. I was just sitting here thinking. What's most people's reaction? Their reaction is get back to work, right? I wish I could sit around all day and do that. The reality is we should carve out time for that. And that's what a lot of people wish they had more of. So let's talk about thinking. Let's get really meta for a minute, okay? We're going to do another poll. And I want you to think about something that is, well, something we don't think about enough, actually. And that's this. When and where do you do your very best thinking? When and where do you do your best thinking? And when you get that pulled up, you are going to be able to enter in two things. When or where do you do your very best thinking? Now, for me, it's typically when I'm running, I'm walking my dogs, when it's quiet. It used to be on airplanes. I will say I just came back on a red eye yesterday I'm in New York and I was in LA, and the LAX to JFK flight is one of the best because it's a great 6 hours of uninterrupted time. And I hadn't had that in a while. It was pretty nice. All right, let's see what other people are saying here. When and where do you do your very best thinking? 35,000 feet in the air. That's my buddy right there. Running, walking, sunrise, Vistage. Bonus points for that person. Car, in the car, holiday. Me too. Did you finally decompress? Driving, singing to music. That's great, right? Freeing up the brain. Happiness is always a good thing. Let's see what else. Doing nothing. In the car, right? That to and from work. Planes, waking up. As this is coming in, for those of you that have already voted, what do you see here? Like, what are the threads or trends? Well, I'll tell you, I'm never surprised by the uniqueness of the answers. I'm always shocked by the consistency of them. This looks like every single time I ask somebody, when and where do you do your best thinking? And what's really great about it is it's so true. Most people do their best thinking when they're alone, typically, when it's quiet, or when they're doing something that they don't have to think about, like, shower, driving a car, cooking. They also don't say at work. A surprise. You say to and from work, but no one says emails, meetings, and that's where you spend most of your time. So the problem is, if we're not doing our best thinking at work, first of all, what are we doing? And the second thing is, how can we carve out time for that thinking to happen? The reality for everyone here is this: when it comes to innovation and it comes to really simplifying your business, simplification is the front end of innovation, right? I'm a futurist. I know foresight is an incredible thing, but we aren't able to even get to foresight, which is critical, until we simplify what we do. We can't create the space for that thinking to happen. So if we want to give our team space to think, let's rethink what we're doing with meetings or the time that we get together on the phone or on Teams. Our best thinking is typically done and our best ideas happen when we're alone. But we get and build our best ideas when we're together. So how can you give people the space to actually come up with their ideas when they're alone and the best way that they think, and then build the best ideas when you're together? That would be an incredible thing to have happen. So now let's take a look. Let's actually now go back and let's move forward with, one second here, if I can, with the next slide. And here's what's really interesting for me. I would like to hear, what do you typically spend your day doing? Right? So if we're not thinking at work, what are the typical things in a day that you do? Right? Type that in for me now if you can, again, using Menti, and let's see what people say. Typically spend your average day doing. Right? We don't think about actually what we do. And what we're going to talk about is, how do we actually be more intentional with our time? So what do you spend your day doing? Okay, meetings, emails, calls, great. Stuff. Stuff. That's good. Managing. Good. Conference calls, helping learn. Excellent. Excellent. It's always interesting to me when I speak at a Vistage event or, similar leaders and sizes of companies. This, unlike the last slide, is much more dynamic than typically when I talk at large organizations. Right here, you can see the trends as they're coming in. Things like planning, travel, questions. You are able to operate with a little more speed. You are able, because you're entrepreneurs, right, to be able to multitask and do more things. The large majority still, just like the large organizations, is meetings and emails. Now, if I were you, I would say, well, yeah, I have to do those things to communicate with people and get things done. However, my question to you is, are all the meetings and all the emails that you are a part of actually valuable and productive? And for most of us, the answer is no, not at all. All right, these are still going to come in. I'm going to move on actually to the next bit here, because I think this is where you're really going to find some interesting things. So we know the complexity is a problem. We know the simplicity is what we need to do to be able to think, to be able to pivot, and to be able to focus. And what's been really inspiring to me during COVID is there are some bad things that have happened during COVID, obviously. But one of the good things that's come out of it is we were forced to question the way that we work. Right? All the beliefs and all the norms and all the ways that we operated suddenly were just completely upended. And we had to do new things that before we said couldn't be done. Right? We'd never be able to work from home. We'd never be able to communicate. Now, technology had a lot to do with that, our ability to do it. 10 years ago, it would have been a lot harder. However, for a lot of organizations, they made it work, and they made it work well. So let me give you some examples. So for example, Ford, 3M, and GE, right? Three giant organizations decided to pivot their manufacturing capacity, which had slowed down a little bit, and decided to, well, manufacture other things. Like, of course, ventilators, medical equipment, and they even 3D printed 100,000 face shields for hospital workers, right? Pivot and still be able to make money and do good things. Another great example that I love is Lyft, right? Uber and Lyft. They partnered with a nonprofit as well as Dole Pineapple. And they did something called essential deliveries, right? Here's hundreds of thousands of drivers, right? And this is their supplemental, if not main income. And no one is taking cars at this point when COVID hit. So what did they do? They actually, this partnership with grocery stores, reached out to Lyft and hired 150,000 of their drivers. And their job was to come to grocery stores, pick up people's groceries, and deliver them to people that were homebound, that were in challenged neighborhoods, or people that were elderly. Again, great partnership, great pivot. Another one that I absolutely love is Open Table. I mean, here's an organization, right, that is relatively new, and they are a restaurant reservation company when it is literally illegal to go out to a restaurant in many countries. What do you do? And we all know this, right? As business owners and entrepreneurs, well, you got to do something, right? You don't have a choice. There's nothing like a burning platform to get people fired up and agile. Well, they did something smart. They actually decided, well, okay, maybe I'm not a restaurant reservation company, I'm a reservation company. And I'm going to partner with people and organizations I never would have before, like grocery stores, which tend to be slower with adopting technology. And they actually gave them a reservation system that accomplished two things. First of all, it helped throttle people by scheduling 2-hour increments through the stores, right? Safer for people and more timely. The second thing it did is it helped them better monitor their inventory so that grocery stores wouldn't run out of, COVID staples, like as you see here, toilet paper and wine, the staples of COVID, of course. Now, here's the next thing. It didn't just change some companies, it changed industries. And what I love about that is there's a lot of industries that were moving towards online, and the resistance wasn't necessarily the entire industry, like education or healthcare. It was the people involved, the customers in that industry. I mean, I'm a learning company, right? We train people on building skills, and we've been building on-demand learning for years. The resistance to education online was incredible until it was forced to happen, right? Working from home wasn't going to work until it was forced to happen. Healthcare and telehealth has been an interesting transition around the world. And the hockey stick that has happened, the acceleration in healthcare online has been tremendous and beneficial. 80% of healthcare visits can be happened by nurses or practitioners versus the doctors. 80% of them, of the intakes and the forms and things like that, can be done online. And a lot of the initial visits can be done, well, via your phone or your computer. And that's what's happening. It's allowing people to have flexibility and saving them time. But the goal for us, and this is really the point, the goal here is not to be agile and pivot. And the reason I say that is a reactive stance. I frankly am getting tired of hearing the words agile and pivot. I want my people to be agile and pivot, but for a very different reason. I don't want them just to react to change, right? I want them to create it. I don't want them just to be ready for anything bad that's happening, but the change that's put upon us. I want them to shape that change. And so the reason for simplicity is it allows you to create the change you want versus react to it. So let's be like some of these organizations, right? They are using simplicity as a strategic advantage of the future. Now, I used organizations that you would know or that you would recognize because, first of all, they have pockets within their organization. They're embracing simplicity. They all do it different ways. Many of them are regulated. And so if they can do it, you can do it. The question is, do you want to be informal or formal about it? So maybe you're like HBO or Google, who internally at some parts of their organizations have cut the crap committees. Who wouldn't love to have a cut the crap committee? What's really cool about a cut the crap committee is it's informal, right? This doesn't come from the top that we all have to cut the crap committees. What comes from the top is we have to move quickly. And so some of the leaders and VPs there have established these committees that are basically informal and rotating every month. So they have 2 people, for example, that are in charge of observing everyone in the wild, whether it's online or in person, and observe what they do all month, like an anthropologist, and report back at the end of the month all the crap that they see as a team that they're doing and recommend how to get rid of it. Because sometimes we can't see, the work that we do and the way others do. Or maybe you're like Tesco that says, for simplicity to happen here, we're going to focus on simplifying inventory. So our inventory are things like, rather than having 18 kinds of ketchup, maybe we only need 8 because people are overwhelmed by choice, and we're going to help them by simplifying it. And as you move all the way up the ladder here, you're going to run into people like Vancity Credit Union in Canada or Pfizer, which is obviously global. They've been able to accomplish some pretty great things. And they have chief simplicity officers, simplicity teams. They have simplicity champions around the world. They have budgets dedicated just to getting and eliminating stupid rules, meetings, emails, and reports. Imagine what you could do if you did the exact same thing. Well, let's talk about that. And I want to use Vancity as a really great example, right? Here's a credit union, which are kind of the sleepy giants within the financial services industry. They're not like investment banks. They have members, not customers. They're here to serve their community. And while they're nice, they tend to be slower on the uptake for technology. Now, Vancity stands for Vancouver, Canada, Vancouver City Credit Union. They're a good-sized credit union. They're regulated, obviously. And they realized the competition from the other banks was starting to make their business decline. And what they did is they actually decided that to improve the customer experience, they needed to improve their online banking. So they hired a technology company. They spent $50 million in a year to increase their ability to serve customers online. After a year, it was a complete failure. Complete failure. They had to start from scratch, right? It was one of those unlucky things that happened. But they decided rather than, coming with another consultant to come in and spend that money, that they would ask customers how they could improve the customer experience first from the inside out. And so what they decided to do was to focus on policies and procedures. Right? You don't focus on everything, it gets chaotic. Policies and procedures, and what they could do to either eliminate, outsource, or streamline those. They had Jayanne, who I met. She is the Chief Simplicity Officer, who had a small rogue team of 5 people trained in Agile. And they created these 2-day sprints, and any business unit could come to them, and they would help them streamline their policies or procedures. And in 1 year, remember, this cost them nothing except their time. That's the beauty of simplicity. It's free to us all. They were able to accomplish, after 18 sprints, quite the results. And I'll share them with you here. They were able to simplify or eliminate over 300 policies and procedures. That's huge. They simplified or eliminated over 100 forms, and they eliminated or simplified steps in their processes, almost 200 of them. Imagine if you did the same thing. Minimal time, low cost, huge results. Well, the reason I want to tell you this is the imperative around simplicity is not what you think. And this is what you're going to be hearing about a lot more. Yes, it is a financial benefit without question. There's a great study from Siegel and Gale, and you can Google that they do every year. There's been a bit of a delay with COVID, but that they do every year that talks about the state of simplicity and its impact in different industries. And here's what they found. You can charge a 6% price premium if you're simplified, because people are happier to work with you than a complex company over here. That's especially true in banking, insurance, and healthcare. Your stock would outperform people in your same industry by over 200%, and your customers are 70% more likely to recommend you. It's like a free sales force. But that's not the reason we're doing it. Simplicity is a cultural and ethical imperative. And now that I said it, you're going to start to hear this, and you're going to hear it more and more, especially coming out of COVID. It's cultural because inside, people work on things that matter. They're much more engaged. Therefore, they're likely to stay, and their customers are much more satisfied, because we all know that the employee experience drives the customer experience. We are not spending our time right on culture. We think culture is things, flexible hours, which is important, bringing your dog to work, having an incredible workspace, offering organic food once in the cafeteria. That's true. But if that's all it took for us to have a great culture and keep everybody, Google would have a 100% retention rate, and they don't. My belief is this: culture is the work you do every day. We do not all experience everyone at the executive level, or no one always experiences you every day. Culture is the work they do every day with their team. So I believe if you get the work right, you get the culture right, because people are working on things that matter. And that's why they came to work with you. Now, the second piece is something a little bit more interesting, which is it's an ethical issue. It has never been more apparent how people wasted their time than during COVID, meaning how they wasted their time before COVID and they recognized, God, I was doing a lot of unnecessary things. It is amazing to me how people get mad when you waste their money, but they don't get mad when you waste their time. It is a non-renewable resource. You will never get it back. And using it with intention is going to be very, very important. Companies are not capital constrained typically. They are change and time constrained. Being able to use people's time on things that matter, people are going to start to demand it, and we're already seeing that now. So for me, what I want to talk about here is the impact on you. What would be the impact if you simplified how your teams worked? What would it look like? What would the experience be? What would the outcome be? How would you know if things were simplified? Type that in for me now, and let's take a look at what people say. What would be that impact if you actually got rid of unnecessary, mundane, everyday work? You'd have more time. Of course, you'd have more time. I mean, like that 1,000,000 hours that I talked about at the beginning. You'd also have much more engagement. That's very true. People would be much more engaged if they were able to work on the things that matter. Coming in, happiness. Yes, happiness is a big one for people. Less stress, more efficient, right? Speed, available time, freedom, fun, greater traction, more productive. I'm going to say something about that a little bit more at the end. The thing about simplicity, I want to make sure if you do this with your teams is, simplicity is not just about efficiency and productivity. It is, of course. But, if a leader goes to their teams and says, hey, I want you to be more productive, that usually doesn't go over very well. I'm productive. What are you talking about? I've got all these competing demands on me. But if you frame it as an effort of, I want to help you better get to the work that matters and be able to focus on better work, that makes an impact on people. All right, you can see here the things that are coming in are not just, the typical metrics like save money, save time, get to market faster. It's less stress, engagement, happiness, culture. So moving on here as we keep going with it is I want to ask you this. So what's stopping you? What's stopping you from simplifying? Let's type that in and let's see what people have to say. I'm always interested in this question because, by the way, asking people what's stopping you is a really powerful question. It's annoying when you get asked it. It's really annoying. Well, what's stopping you? Because usually people are just making excuses or they're having old beliefs hold them back. But when we think about it, and you'll see here, maybe it's not always what we think. What's holding us back? Fear of failure. That is a big one. And thank you for bringing that up. Having the will, nothing. Growing too fast, right? Sometimes that is a challenge. Congratulations if that's the case. Changing the status quo, old thinking, perceptions, me. This is a great group. You guys are very honest about this. Fear of failure, change. The interesting thing about complexity and the ability to simplify is it's not only us that create the complexity. We usually have the best intentions when we're doing it, right? We want to move faster. We just add on to old things. But one of the reasons it's hard for people to simplify is fear, right? When you ask people what complexity they experience at work, especially in regulated industries, most people say regulation. Then they'll say, it's the company structure, or, it's the way we're organized, or it's leadership. But really, when you ask them, well, what is most complex at work? They list things like cultural norms, habits, time sucks, meetings, emails. They're tactical. And when you really ask what drives those, it's behaviors. Most of complexity is driven by risk, fear, power control, and lack of trust. So our jobs, right, as leaders is not just to take away the friction. It's to take away the fear. And when we start to simplify, we have to play a role in exemplifying the habits and behaviors we want of people so they don't feel fearful of simplifying. So as these are still coming in, and they will still come in on the back end, I'm going to move on to why we're going to kill complexity and how we're going to do it. And I'm going to rattle off a lot of ways to do it here. For most of us, we have grown up in a culture at companies like this. We needed to be organized, always busy, right? Everyone says, how are you doing? I'm busy. Productive. We have to be agile, and we have to be able to handle more. I think the cultures of the future have to shift to this, because some of the myths around complexity are being organized. When something's organized, it might not be simplified. So the shift is, let's be simplified, let's be intentional, let's be impactful, let's be proactive and shape change, and let's work on valuable things.